Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.
Hello, this is Philip Kinsella, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK radio network, the UK's biggest paranormal network, and this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Hello, welcome to the show. Thank you for that, Philip. Okay, we've got some call-outs today for Alex Lovelock, Beccles, Suffolk, UK, Kaz Rooney, Doncaster, UK, and Daniel Squire, Diddington, UK. Right, now, the guest on this show is Kieran Woodhouse. He describes himself as a paranormal researcher. I mean, I think I'll describe him as that as well. And I think I'll do no more, but I think I'll introduce him right now. Hello, Kieran. How are you?
Hi, David. I'm very well, thanks. Yourself?
Good. Yeah, thank you. And I'll just explain. I was on Kieran's show last week, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that. But this is going to be highlighting Kieran on this show, so I did most of the speaking on the other one, so he can do most of the speaking on this one. Right, here, Kieran, so I've described you as a paranormal researcher. You do your own podcasts and things. Perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about that before we kick off and go into deeper subjects.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a paranormal investigator, paranormal researcher. So I go out with a team, I go out with a group of friends, and we investigate haunted locations around England. I have my own podcast. I co-host with Ben Kelly, who's one of the guys who comes on the investigations with me. The podcast is called Paranormal Paradigm. So you can find that on all the usual places, Spotify, YouTube. You can like us on Facebook and follow it through there. It's been a fun, interesting 2 or 3 years really since I kind of got into this field, and it's showing no signs of getting boring yet.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, when the show goes out, I'll put a link to your podcast on my page as well. So it'll be hopefully you might pick up a few more listeners. You never know.
Great.
But, so what's been your most recent action? I think you got a baby on the way, haven't you? Let's tell everyone that while you're at it.
Not
you, your wife has.
I look like I have. If the interview ends abruptly, it's because we're 6 days overdue now. She should be downstairs on her exercise ball as we speak.
Okay, so if you disappear, we know why.
Yeah, that's exactly why.
Okay, so what's been your latest adventures? What have you done much lately, or have you sort of really been at home a lot?
No, actually, nothing's really slowed down in terms of ghost hunting. So I've recently released a book, which is my first book, and that's called An Introduction to Paranormal Investigation, and that's available on Amazon or all the ebook sites or through myself. And that was really the kind of the backbone of my presentations that I give as I go around the country to groups giving presentations on investigating techniques and evidence that I've gathered. And I kept getting asked, have you got a book to sell or have you got any of this written down? And I thought I should really do something like this. So it was quite easy, it wrote itself because I was already doing it when I was giving the presentation. I just put it into book form, and people have described it as like a dummy's guide or a starter's guide to paranormal investigating, which that's all it is. There's each chapter's on a different piece of equipment that we use, why we use it, the background to it, any evidence we've got from it, any skepticism I have towards it, which was actually, I surprised myself quite a lot at the amount of skepticism I do have. And then there's a few stories sprinkled throughout as well, just for entertainment purposes. So that's the biggest, latest thing I've done, and amongst little investigations that we've been doing here and there.
Yeah, like you say, we've got to start out as a skeptic anyway. You can't just accept everything you see as always paranormal. It's just, you've got to think what else it can be, haven't you?
I massively agree. I mean, I go to investigations with the mindset of disproving that ghosts exist. And then if the tables are flipped and something happens that I can't disprove, then, bonus, that's great. But if you go expecting everything to be a ghost, believing that everything is a ghost, then you can't really call that research. That's just kind of like blind belief. Yeah. So you have to go with that skeptical head on. I know it's a cliche, but you really do have to sit on the fence. And some things you can explain away. In fact, 99.9% of the things you can explain away. But it's that 0.1% that keeps you going back. You hear footsteps that you can't explain, or, you hear a noise, or you feel a touch that you just can't explain. And then that makes you want to go back again and again. And it does become quite an addiction, actually. You want to kind of chase that high, and you want to better the results that you got last time.
Sure, yeah. I mean, some of the ghost hunts I've been on, sometimes in the night you think, oh, she's getting too boring, nothing's happening, and I think let's just go home and forget, go back to bed or something. I think that, and then something will kick off, won't it? Something will happen about 1:30 in the morning, and I think, oh, that was interesting.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's so many. I mean, that statement you just made is so multi-layered, because you've got people that are getting bored because nowadays people's attention spans are so short. That they're checking Facebook every 5 minutes or whatever, and also because they watch programs such as Most Haunted and these entertainment TV programs, which is all they are, and that they see that in 45-minute TV program, there's knocking, there's kicking, there's things being thrown, people being possessed, and they expect to turn up to an evening and have that constantly throughout the night. And partly why I wrote the book was to try and explain to these people that is not what ghost hunting is. Ghost hunting is, as you've just said, sitting there at 1:30 in the morning, doing your best not to fall asleep.
You think a lot of the time.
Yeah, getting cold, thinking you've heard a ghost, but it's the bloke next to you snoring. So that's ghost hunting, and you're right. It's when you kind of, you're not focusing, and you might be talking about the football match last night or something. You'll start to see shadows, or you'll hear a noise, almost like they're trying to get your attention again. And it's always interesting how that works, actually. When you're least suspecting it, that's when it kicks off.
There's also with programs like Most Haunted, which I do like, actually, I do enjoy it, but they're there for sort of all night, aren't they? Like 6 or 7 hours maybe.
Yeah,
and you're seeing all of that cut down into maybe a 45-minute TV show. So they're showing you all the we'll say the best bits, all the bits where things may well have happened.
I mean, it's not even that it's a 45-minute TV show, but the actual investigating in the show is probably 20 minutes, because they start the show by telling you a bit about the place, and they have that walk around, and at the end of the show they go through the evidence that they found. So the actual investigating that you see is a 20-minute condensed version, as from what you said, 6 or 7 hour investigations. When we go like 9 till 3 or 8 till 2 or something like that. So we're there for a long time.
Yeah.
And, these guys from Most Haunted, like, they'll have 8 hours of probably not a lot happening. But what they do find can easily be condensed into 20 minutes. Then they put the TV spin on it, i.e., they make it look better than it was. And because these guys, they rely on us watching it and us enjoying it. Because if we don't enjoy it, then people are going to stop watching. And then they'll lose their jobs ultimately, and they won't live the lavish lifestyles that they're living. And the problem with that is the second that you start becoming reliant on entertaining people, you then begin to lose, in my opinion, a reliability of your evidence and your research, because you're no longer interested in that. You're only interested in entertaining people. And that's when things such as trickery and fakery become apparent. And there is evidence on YouTube of these TV shows faking things. And I feel like they always start out with the best of intentions, but they have to go down this route if they're going to keep their jobs, if they're going to keep renewing their series after series. And unfortunately, that's the dark side of the entertainment, ghost hunting industry.
I think that happens more with the American shows as well, doesn't it? So these American ghost hunting things, they make them so dramatic that all sorts,
Yeah, it's literally like watching a horror film with some of them. It's, you've got they play the music before something happens. happens. And it's almost like a script, if you're used to watching horror movies, you can always tell just as that music's reaching the highest pitch, something's going to jump out or things like that. And when you watch these programs, it's kind of like that. You know that something's going to happen. You know that they're going to catch something moving if you follow it enough. And you're right, it does come across as very scripted at times.
I must apologise to our American listeners out there. I wasn't insulting you. I was just saying, because this does go out across the states, and no, it's something they are entertaining. I mean, I did used to like the Ghost Hunters International, was it, with Barry Fitzgerald, and they were very, very good.
I've met Barry. He's a really cool guy. At Awakening, actually, I know you've been there. He does a lot with Steve Mera, and the research that they do is really good, and they give great lectures. I used to enjoy that. It was probably one of the only programs I used to enjoy watching, actually. Yeah, it's very good. I've got the DVD set there. It's quite good.
Oh, nice. I met Joe. Oh, what's his name? Joe Chin. A couple of years ago, he was over here. Went to a Paraforce convention in Essex.
Okay.
Which was pretty good, yeah. And I think Barry was there as well. He did a good presentation.
Yeah, he always does. He comes across very well. I've got a couple of his books. A very good researcher.
Yeah, he is, I must say. So really, is that sort of your main interest? I mean, I kind of branch into like UFOs and things, which is probably, I wouldn't say my speciality, but because I don't think there are any specialities, but that was probably my prime interest in really. But I'm interested in all sorts of the paranormal, and I think there's a lot of links to a lot of it anyway.
Yeah. I mean, my theory and what I kind of propose at my presentations and partially in my book is that it is all connected, because I believe that we live in a holographic universe. And everything that we see is illusory, and it's all basically being manifested by the mind. So this is what kind of led me into looking into ghosts, because my background really was UFOs. I probably, if someone asks me, do you know this person related to ghost hunting? And I probably don't. If someone asks me if I know a UFO researcher, then guaranteed I do, and I've probably got one of their books. So my background does lie with ufology, but I was trying to run links between them and to see how everything exists within this world, and through people like David Icke and people like this, it really opened my eyes and kind of pushed me towards the theory that we are living in this holographic world. And then once I started to understand that, I began to think, well, if we're living in a holographic world, then where do ghosts come into this, and where do UFOs come into this, and even where do cryptids come into this? But things like Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster. And so, I mean, one thing that is a fact is that we can see 0.05% of the light spectrum. We call that visible light, and that means there's 95.5% of the world existing, 99.5% of the world, existing around us that we can't see. And that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just that, we can't perceive it with our human eyes. It's a different
vibration plane, isn't it? That's the way it's been explained.
That's exactly right. So I always explain it as a radio. So if you're in your car and you're listening to Radio X, that doesn't mean that Radio Y doesn't exist. It's there. Your radio, or your brain, just isn't tuning into it. As soon as you tune into Radio Y, Radio X still exists, you're just not tuning into it anymore.
That's right. That's actually a good analogy, isn't it? That?
Yeah.
All those stations are still running alongside each other, but you only listening to the one. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there are times where, you've most definitely had it in your car where, the two radio stations get mixed together and you hear, two songs clashing with each other, and then it fixes itself and it goes back to what you were listening to before. And I theorise that it's possible that when someone sees a ghost or a UFO or, like I say, a Bigfoot, it's possible that what's happened is your frequency range there has clashed, and for the briefest of seconds, you are seeing or you're accessing a frequency that you couldn't before, and you're ultimately listening to Radio X and Radio Y at the same time. And then how many times I hear of people saying, well, the ghost just vanished before my eyes, or Bigfoot walked behind the tree but he didn't come out the other side. And what could have happened is he did come out the other side. It's just that you've changed radio stations again, and therefore you're not tuning in to seeing him. And if you think about it like that, it does help you understand how all of these things can be living around you. And this would mean that UFOs aren't interplanetary, they're potentially interdimensional.
Yes, I agree with that, yeah.
And that fits in with this theory. And then if you start looking, at another analogies to help people understand, I use a block of flats. So if we were to live on one level, on one floor, you might have ghosts living above you, aliens are living below you, Bigfoot's knocking around on the top floor somewhere.
Scary block of flats, I'll tell you.
But yeah, I can tell you're scary around by me. And you know that these people are living above you and below you because you hear them. You might hear them play their music or they bang the furniture around. You know they're there. And you might every now and then catch a glimpse of them as you walk past each other in the lift. But ultimately you are living on separate floors and therefore you can't communicate with them. You can't interact with them. And that's what's happening, in my opinion, in this world. All of these things are existing outside of our frequency range. And that's why, dogs or cats or, reptiles who can see into the infrared range or the ultraviolet range, you might see these creatures just sat there staring at something in the corner of your living room you can't see. And it's because they can see outside of our frequency range. Yeah. They can see a little bit more of that 99.95%. And so you look at them thinking, what are they mad? What are they looking at?
Cats do that a lot, don't they? They'll sort of stare at things.
All the time. It's because they can see into different frequencies. And so therefore, it's most probable that they are seeing something that we just can't see. So when we're ghost hunting, we start to use ultraviolet torches. I know Barry Fitzgerald's very big on how ultraviolet can repel evil energy. We use infrared cameras, which helps us see, things that our eyes won't help us see. So we've started to kind of migrate towards using equipment that again fits this theory and helps us see outside of our visible light and our visible range. Because in my opinion, that's where everything is existing.
That's interesting. You mentioned David Icke a little while back. Yes. Are you a big follower of David Icke? I know a lot of people think he's crazy, but I was once on the fence with him, but I've actually seen him several times, and funny enough, I actually met him to speak to a couple of weeks back.
Great.
Yeah, and he was quite amazing, and I actually asked him if he'd be willing to come on my show, and he said, I'm not averse to it, and he said, I gave him a card and everything, so you never know, one day I might get him on.
That'd be brilliant.
But I know he's a very busy man, but I actually think he's quite a genius rather than a madman. I mean, he's for the books he knocks out as well. His latest one's about 900 pages, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, they're heavy going, his books. I'm a huge fan of David Icke. I mean, he's the guy that kind of got me into questioning, perception of reality.
Oh, sure, yeah.
To questioning and people call them conspiracies because they don't want to own up to the truth that's in most of them. But he's the guy that opened my eyes to a lot of things. And people easily forget when they're calling him, saying he's the guy who calls the Queen a lizard. But it doesn't mean that she goes home, unzips herself and lies under a heat lamp, and starts eating locusts. If you actually take the time to read his book and not just parrot what the mainstream media are telling you to think about
That's it. If you just focus on that little bit, it does sound ridiculous, and it is ridiculous.
Exactly. But it's one, like I've just kind of, tried to link UFOs to ghosts and things. It's one very, very small part of a huge picture that he spent years, a lifetime researching. And if you could only take the time to read a bit of his book or, watch a bit of his presentations on YouTube, because they're all there, you might get a little bit more of an understanding of what he's saying. And you don't have to agree with everything that he says.
No, of course not.
But if you can acknowledge that back in the 90s, he called out people like Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harris in books such as The Biggest Secret. This was back in the 90s. And it is only in recent times that these things have happened. He's been talking about the cashless society for years. He's been talking about the chipping of people. He's been talking about all of the global warming scam. And he's been talking about all of this, and it's all now coming to light. So he's not that much of a madman, is he? He's got some stuff right, and he's definitely worth listening to.
And also, when you actually read his book, it's not all his research. He's actually backing up other people's research as well.
Definitely, yeah.
He's researched other people's research and sort of come up with the same results, hasn't he? Basically.
Yeah, I mean, his book, they're 900 pages because about a third of them are footnotes. Where he's citing, he's referencing where he's got that information from. So if you were a real researcher, you'd look at those footnotes and you'd go away and look at them yourself, and you'd form your own opinion that way. Unfortunately nowadays people are quick enough to jump on the bandwagon. You know, everyone's a researcher because they watch YouTube videos, and it makes it difficult for people like David Icke to get his point across. But he does have a following, and you know, he's woke me up, and I know he's so to speak, and I know he's kind of got through to other people that I know. So he's obviously doing something right.
Like you say, I don't believe absolutely everything that he comes out with. Not the fact that he's lying. I think he may see something in a different way to what other people see it. But that doesn't mean he's wrong. I think his research may be, well, I don't know. I mean, who can say? Maybe his research is right and the other person's wrong. But
well, I think his research evolves, and it's like mine, you know. And anyone that does researching, so. Over the years, he's called them reptilians. He's called them archons. You know, these people that control, you know, in his work, these people that control the world. And he's called them different names, and that's because as he's continued to research, he's come across new evidence, and therefore he's changed his theory. And he's thought, actually, no, that wasn't quite right. This is what it is. And as a researcher, and as you know yourself, nothing is ever set in stone. You have to have that ability to change your opinion. So if I was to find next week that everything I've just explained to you with that radio analogy and all of that, if I was to find evidence that was to suggest that was slightly wrong, I would be a fool to dismiss it because it didn't fit in with my belief.
Oh yeah, you can't just have tunnel vision and say, oh no, I've already made my mind up there, I can't change it.
Exactly, because in my opinion, it's all about making things fit. It's finding research and forming your opinion on that, as opposed to forming an opinion and then only picking and choosing the research that backs that opinion up. It doesn't work that way round.
No, of course it doesn't. I mean, we ought to talk a little bit more about his the reptilian thing, I think, to explain a bit. He seems to think that, and I kind of agree with him, that the reptilians are on a different vibration plane and a different dimension, and sometimes they can come through and they actually live off of our fear, according to And a lot of the time, you know, you mentioned Jimmy Savile. I mean, I did hear a story once that somebody saw Jimmy Savile turn into a reptilian. Now, whether that's true or not, but
well, I've heard loads. I've heard, you know, Adele turned into a reptilian.
Oh, right.
I've heard a lot of stuff like that. But again,
but that doesn't mean they're actually reptilians in a zip suit or whatever. That means
that
they are being affected from a different dimension, and it's kind of a bit like possession, isn't it? If you think of a body being possessed by an evil spirit or something, or you know, I don't know if you see it in that same light.
I mean, in our field, you know, in the paranormal field, we get people that will call them spirits, people call them demons, you know, and then you're moving into a more of a religious side of things with exorcisms and stuff like that. I know people that call aliens demons. They believe that aliens are demons. So it's a slightly off topic, but something I've been banding around in my head over the past few months, I guess, is it possible that when people experience these reptilians or, you know, these greys or a ghost or again a Bigfoot or anything like that, is it possible that what they're experiencing is the same paranormal phenomena? So if you were to strip away the hologram, strip away the computer and get right the way down to just the basic coding of the universe, is what they're seeing the same thing? However, they're seeing it differently because they're manifesting it to fit their belief. So isn't it interesting that anyone that is religious will always see Jesus, or they will always see the Virgin Mary, or Allah, or Muhammad, or anything like that? And if you're big into UFOs, you will see a UFO. And if you go on and, you know, if you believe in ghosts, 9 times out of 10 you believe in ghosts, and you see a ghost. And what I've been thinking is that it's possible that we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing the same code. We're seeing the same structure. It's the same paranormal phenomena, but we're manifesting it differently in our mind, and therefore we're seeing it how we want to see it to fit in our reality. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That's actually come up in a couple of other shows. Where it seems like we seem to manufacture the vision that we want to see.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I'm glad that other people.
Yeah, no, I had Adele Casares Roadshow on a few shows, quite a few months ago now. But she was going into things like that and about creatures and Bigfoot and everything that they can actually be created, or they seem or seemingly created by the mind. You know.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, if you go out into the woods and with the sole intention of finding evidence of a Bigfoot, you will. In my opinion, you will. You'll hear, because even if you haven't, you'll hear a bang and you will associate it with a Bigfoot. And like I say, we have people that come on ghost hunts and everything is a ghost. They hear someone's stomach grumbling at 1 a.m. and they think it's a ghost. And no matter what you tell them, they're adamant it's a ghost. So therefore, in their mind, they have manifested that. They've made that creation and they've that belief, and they can go home and believe that they experienced a ghost. So I could massively agree with that.
Yeah, I've heard the stomach rumbling bit before.
Yeah,
sometimes mine. Yeah.
Yeah. One tip for people is never go for a curry before you go on a ghost hunt.
It can be quite funny. But yeah, what sort of equipment do you like? Are you a supporter of equipment? Like meters and like meters and everything.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, in the book, there's a chapter on different pieces of equipment. But I think the best piece of equipment that anyone can use is themselves. Because, you can trust yourself. And what I tend to do is, before I go on an investigation, is, I'm far from a monk, but I try and kind of limit what I eat and what I drink in terms of sugary intake. And, you see people turn up on investigations with big cans of Red Bull and bags of sugary sweets. Yeah, and these are known to give you migraines, to make your heart beat faster, and people can associate that with paranormal activity. I've got a headache. Could that mean something? Well, yeah, you're just down 2 Red Bulls, so it's probably that. So I'm always careful of what I put into my body prior to an investigation.
Funny thing is, you were talking about Barry Fitzgerald. Now, Barry Fitzgerald was a big supporter of that, isn't he? About trying to cut down on your sugar intake, because that's like a controlling mechanism for your body, and it's also it also deadens your mind.
Well, of course it does. I mean, without getting too off topic, you look at things that we put into our body, like fluoride in the water, how it can calcify your pineal gland, and the pineal gland is it helps you spiritually, but it also helps in terms of the melatonin release into your body, which controls your wake and sleep cycle. And if it's calcified and if it's being prevented from releasing melatonin into your bloodstream, then you're not going to sleep. And if you don't sleep very well, you begin to hallucinate and you begin to see things, in this kind of sleep-wake state. You begin to see things that probably aren't there, sleep paralysis and things like that. So again, that's why I trust my own body as much as any piece of equipment, because if I see something or if I hear something, I know to trust myself. And yes, I could lie to myself and convince myself that I did see something if I didn't, but I'd know that deep down. So it's really, ghost hunting is a very personal thing that one person can do. You can, if you go out and you get in touch with a dead relative or a dead friend, or if you see something and you've seen it, you've experienced it, it's very personal. In terms of other pieces of equipment, some of them kind of we use because people on TV use them, and no one really knows why or if there's any evidence or scientific background to it. So we look at the K2 meter or the EMF meter, and this is the most, it's the first thing in any ghost hunter's toolbox. And this is that, little black device that people hold kind of in front of them, and the idea is that a spirit comes near it, interacts with it, and the lights flash between green and red. This was used originally to detect faulty wiring in a house, leaky electrics or faulty microwaves. So if you've got one and you hold it near a plug, if it's flashing right up to red, you probably want to call an electrician in, because there's something slightly wrong with your electrics. So, because what it does is it detects disturbances in the surrounding electromagnetic field. And so it's good in that sense, because if you're in a location where you've done a sweep, as you should do, and you've made sure that there's no faulty electrics, and, if you're stood in an area and it was flashing before and now it's flashing again, there's probably something easy enough to explain as to why it's doing that. But if you're in a place where the electrics are fine, everyone's mobiles are off, and this thing's interacting with you, then it can be quite interesting. And what that tells you is that whatever it is that's interacting with you has the ability to alter the electromagnetic field. Now, there's no scientific evidence to prove that that is what a ghost can do, but that, you know, people use it and people claim that that's evidence of a spirit interacting with them. Now, I prefer what's called a REM pod, which is a radiating electromagnetism pod. And I'm not sure if you've heard of that.
I think I've heard the term, but I'm not sure if I've seen one in action actually, though. I think they're fantastic. So they're they're loosely based on the theremin, you know, the old instrument where you don't actually touch it, but if you move your hand near it, it makes a noise. Yeah.
Yeah, like those weird instruments. So it's like that, and, you know, it's like a little box, it has an antenna, and the difference is that it produces its own electromagnetic field. So whereas the K2 meter will detect disturbance in the surrounding field.
Now you've described it, I have seen one in action. Yeah, I didn't know what it was called, that's all.
Yeah, well, we tend to call them REM pod because radiating electromagnetism pod's a bit of a mouthful. And the idea is that it pumps out its own EMF field, and then as something gets near it and disturbs that field, it makes a noise, it bleeps at you, some of them will flash lights at you. And it's a really good device because it shows that something is interacting with the field that it's pumping out. Whereas the EMF meter might be influenced by mobile phones or by, you know, faulty electrics and stuff like that, because that's the EMF field that's surrounding us. This actually produces its own. So if something is interfering with it, chances are something is interfering with it. And if you're lucky enough to own a couple, you could line them up down a room, and we've heard of people that have done that, and they've heard them go off as if something was walking up and down the room past them.
Yeah, I've seen something like that myself, yeah.
Yeah.
But, I'll tell you what, we were in the woods once, in Rendlesham Woods, because, you know, I live near the Rendlesham Woods. Yeah. We had two of those meters, you know, the, what's it called?
The K2 meter.
The K2 meter, that's right. It slipped my mind for a minute. Yeah, we had two of those, and one was going alternate to the other one. You know.
Oh, well, that is interesting, yeah.
Because you think, well, they'd both be going together if there was something going on together, but one was going off and one was going on, you know, and it was weird. Both going round to red, and then just both dying completely. You know,
that's good, because like you say, if it was picking up on something that was nearby, you'd think they'd both be interacting the same. You know, and we had something like that at a place called the Ancient Ram Inn in Gloucester, and we had two, and we were sat in a circle. One was in the middle of the circle and one was on the outside, and one was lighting up, so we asked for the other one to light up, and the one stopped and then the other one lit up.
I've seen that,
and then, yeah, that was it, and it kept, and people described it like it was a little child running between the two, kind of playing a game with us. It was very interesting to see.
Yeah, I was quite amazed actually. I went to Scotland, or Carlisle, just outside of Scotland, just over the border into Scotland, and Carlisle from my direction. And they had some maglite torches, you know, the small maglite torches. These were placed in the room, and nobody was touching these maglite torches, but they were going on and off alternately to request. You know,
wow.
And that was, I was actually mind blown by that, you know.
Yeah, that's when you can get stuff like that, and you know, as long as you can tell that they weren't faulty batteries, and because we've had that with a laser grid pen.
I know the one. Yeah,
Where it puts loads of dots on the wall basically, so you can see shadows. And we had one that I think they take one battery, and we got through they take two batteries, and we got through 6 batteries in one investigation.
Wow. Yeah.
Because it just kept draining it, and when it happened for the third time, someone in the team just said, as it got dimmer, they said, no, make it bright again, and it went bright, and they said, okay, dim it, and it dimmed, and they asked it about 4 times, and it kept doing what they were asking, and then eventually it died again. And we'd never had fault with it before, we've never had fault with it since, it interacted with us, it did exactly what we asked it to do. So when stuff like that happens, you kind of have to rule out faulty equipment and start to consider the fact that it could be paranormal.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you do get the draining of batteries a lot as well in paranormal investigations, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, people say that it's they need to kind of absorb that energy, absorb that electricity to interact with us. So again, we're talking about things that can't interact with us on our frequency, so they need this energy in order to come into our frequency range. So there was an experiment we did that was similar to this, where we had EMF emitters. So we had 2 EMF emitters in 2 corners of this room. It was probably about the same size as your average living room, really. And we had a radio receiver that we were tuning into all these frequencies. So effectively what we were doing was flooding the room with EMF. You know, obviously you can't see it, but we were flooding this room. And we kept scanning through all the frequencies, seeing if we could find that, you know, something that was interacting with us. We didn't get a thing. We had our EMF meter, we had our REM pod, and nothing was happening. It was really quite quiet, and it got a little bit boring, to be honest.
Yeah.
So after about 10 minutes or so, I went round, switched everything off, and effectively emptied the room of EMF. The second we did that, the REM pod shot up to the K2 shot up to red. The REM pod started going crazy, and white noise kind of kicked in on our radio receiver. So what I think had happened was we'd flooded the room with frequency ranges, with waves, and we'd prevented a spirit from interacting with us because he couldn't interact on any of those frequencies. And as soon as we'd emptied the room, he could now come in on his own frequency and interact with us. Almost like, you know, if you're kind of at a party and you can't get into the kitchen because it's a bit busy, you think, oh, I'll come back later. Yeah. And that's what he'd done. You know, he came back and went, oh, I can get in now. So he came in and all the equipment started kicking off. And I just found that really interesting because, again, it kind of tallied up with the theory that we spoke about earlier, where they are operating on particular frequencies.
Sure, yeah. What about Echovox? Have you ever tried that? Or used one of those? That's the one where it's going with frequencies, and you've got a needle going, and it's going round through frequencies, and it picks out words.
Yeah. You get a lot of these now that are available on like phone apps and things like that, which I'm always wary of because, you know, people could just program them to say what, you know.
I know. Yeah, we know a character that does that. Yeah, which makes a. I won't go into. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm always wary of stuff like that, actually. I mean, one thing we do use that's similar to that is a spirit box or a ghost box. Mm-hmm. So it's basically just it's a radio scanner, but in your car, if you're scanning the radio stations, when it finds one, it stops. All this does is it has that ability taken out. So every time it finds a new station, it stops for a millisecond. You know, you can change the setting, but it is a millisecond, and then it moves on to the next one. So you kind of get this constant static with a word every now and then. And the idea is that the spirits pick their frequencies to communicate with you. And we've had some very good sessions with that. I had a very emotional experience with one of those with my nan that had only passed about 6 hours before.
Oh, right.
That was very I guess mind blowing.
Yeah. Did you actually know she'd passed at that time, or?
Yeah, so I mean I can go into it if you
sure.
Like.
Yeah, please do.
So
if you don't mind, I mean, if it's that.
No, it's fine. I mean, I've told it enough times. She died, I guess it was about 1:30 on the day after. Well, it was Boxing Day night, so we were into the 27th of December now. Mm. So she died the early hours of then, and as every family does, we gathered round. It was my mum and dad's house the next day. We all went round in the morning, and my granddad said to me and my brother, "Can you go and sort the house out?" Because they got the bed downstairs and the coffee table upstairs and all that stuff. So we went down and we swapped all the furniture back round for him. And while we were down there, my brother's not really into any of this. He's got no interest in this. Mm. But he said, like, "Do you think she's here?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And he said, "Well, shall we try?" And as every good ghost investigator does, I happen to have some equipment in my car.
Yeah, you've got to ask yourself, why did he say that? There was something planted into his mind.
I've asked myself this.
Sorry to interrupt you, but it just sort of crossed my mind as you said that. I thought, if he's not interested in it, why did he suddenly think of it?
I don't know. After this, I'll tell you about the UFO that we both saw. Because I know you're big on that. But, so I don't know, but so I went and got my spirit box and we went back into the house and we turned it on, and any of your listeners that have used a spirit box, or, if you have, you'll know how it works. And we set it to scanning, and I said, "Nana, you're here." And we got what sounded like a yes. And I thought, well, you pareidolia, you hear what you want to hear.
Yeah, you can. You can.
And so I said, "Nana, you're here." And we got a yes again. And I thought, okay, fine. And I said, "Granddad's not here at the moment. He's at Mum and Dad's." And we got Raymond, which is my granddad's name. But I thought, that's strange. And, we we weren't kind of telling each other what to think. You know, we both looked at each other and mouthed Raymond, you know, so we both heard it. And I said, yeah, Grandad, he'll be back down later. And, but I said, he's at Mum and Dad's. At which point she said, Adrian. Now that's my dad's name.
Wow, yeah.
So now I'm thinking, right, you know, again, anyone that's used the spirit box, the chances of this are very, very slim. And I said, yes, Adrian, Dad, that's where he is. We then got Kieran. Now, at this point, my eyes started to water, as they are now, actually. And because it wasn't Kieran, she never used to say Kieran, it was always Kieran. Right. And it came across just like that. And, you know, me and my brother were looking at each other like, what the hell is this? And my brother said, and then she stopped and there was just lots of noise. And my brother said, what are you doing, Nan? Who are you talking to? And then we heard, they're my grandchildren, which we were. So again, another tick off the list. And again, anyone that's used one of these, to get such a long phrase such as they're my grandchildren is very rare, because it's normally very, you know, very stop-starty. So to get that was mind-blowing in itself. And Nan said, and Cam, my brother, said, who are you talking to? You know, what do you mean they're my grandchildren? And then it kind of stopped. And then we heard the word terrifying. She said terrifying. And we were like, terrifying? What's terrifying? And then the spirit box stopped working. So it was on, but there was no static, there was nothing, and I was like, oh no, what's going on? So I was banging it on the coffee table, you know, trying to make it work. Yeah. Sorry, Grandad, I was banging it on your coffee table. And eventually, after about 30 seconds or so, it kicked back in. And there was about 10 seconds of static while we're both shouting at it, what's terrifying, you know. And then eventually, she spoke again, and she said, God. Now, at this point, I dropped it on the floor and left the house. My brother stayed, and he said that she told him to go upstairs to a bedroom, and it eventually stopped. But, you know, I don't believe in God. And so I was a bit shocked at that, and I was a bit upset. And in hindsight, we've spoke about it, and we think that maybe, you know, because she died hours before, and we think it's possible that she was in a limbo or some kind of waiting room. And, you know, when she said they're my grandchildren, she was talking to someone there. And she was confused. She didn't know what was going on.
Probably
maybe what she thought
on
was
the
God.
journey to the wherever you go.
Yeah. Wherever you go. And she was probably a bit scared, a bit confused. So that's what she meant by terrifying. But it was a mind-blowing experience, and one I'm glad I shared with my brother, because, you know, him not really being into this kind of thing, it proved that I wasn't just hearing things, and I wasn't just, you know, as we said earlier, manifesting what we want to see and hear.
Sure.
He kind of backed up that experience, and it made me feel a bit easier about it.
Sure. I'm sorry to ask, but did she die suddenly, or was it expected?
It was expected. She deteriorated throughout the year.
No, I just wondered if she had died suddenly, she may have sort of been confused about where she was and everything, but I imagine that can happen anyway, but
I think so. I think, you know, a consciousness had fled the body, and she probably just didn't understand where she was and what was going on. You know, she didn't have Grandad with her and stuff like that, so it got a little bit confused. And I've since spoken to my cousin, who I don't talk to a lot because she lives down in Southampton, and she said that the night after she died, she was in a bedroom talking to her. And has since spoken to her and communicated with her. So it's very interesting, actually.
Yeah, I mean, did you Nan have any beliefs in the afterlife and everything? So she did always believe in it. So it could be that she wanted to come back and give you that message that there is something there.
I think so. I mean, she used to tell us, there was one ghost story that she used to tell us all the time that her and my granddad had experienced. So I think she was an avid believer in it. I'm not, religious wise, I don't think she was really. Although I was never aware of it. But she definitely did believe in ghosts, and her house itself was very active. So yeah, I think maybe she wanted to show us, you know, look, I was right. You know, ghosts do exist.
Did she ever have her house examined, looked at by investigators?
Yeah, we did it.
You did it.
My granddad died. Not long ago, maybe 6 months, maybe longer. I'm getting my times mixed up. Sally was pregnant, so probably about 7 months ago he died, and it was a council house, so we had to gut it and strip it and get it all ready for a handover.
Yeah.
And I kept one of the keys behind, and me and my team went down there and we investigated it, yeah.
That's a bit naughty, wasn't it?
Yeah, some of my family don't know. But yeah, it was something I'd always wanted to do because I'd heard stories of my dad growing up there. He used to tell me about experiences that he's had. I wanted to try and talk to Nan again, and Grandad. And, so it was quite an interesting night, actually.
You did get some results then?
Yes, we got, on the spirit board, we got my Nan, got what sounded like my Grandad on the spirit box. We had shadows walking across the landing, footsteps in the bedroom, shadows through the banisters on the stairs. The REM pod kept going mad in the kitchen, and we have what's called like a thermometer gauge. So every time the temperature changes, goes higher or lower, it bleeps at you. And that was going literally every 10 seconds. It was going up, it was going down, it was going up, it was going down. So something was going on in the kitchen. So yeah, it was a really interesting night, actually. You know, if you take the personal element out of it, it was a really interesting night.
Yeah, I've experienced that when the temperature drops really low, doesn't it? Sometimes, even in the summer, and you're indoors, and normally it wouldn't be that cold. And,
no, I mean, again, that's where things such as the thermal imaging camera, you know, the infrared camera, or there's a cheaper version which is basically just like a laser gun, and you point the laser at an object or an area, and it gives you a temperature reading back. All these pieces of equipment are really good for things like that. You know, if anyone's feeling a cold spot, or they say their hand feels cold, or anything like that, you can use those pieces of equipment, and they're quite handy.
Sure, yeah. How do you feel about Ouija boards and things like that?
Ouija boards, I tend to call them spirit boards because the term Ouija is actually trademarked by Hasbro.
That's true, yeah. I know.
It's just a gaming company.
Yeah.
And that's all it was, essentially. It was a game for, you know, I guess, rich Victorians or whatever to play once they'd eaten their boiled goose or whatever they used to eat. And they'd all gather around and try and contact the dead. And Ouija is obviously oui and ja, which is yes, yes in French and German, because that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to get a yes answer. So people always, you know, in my presentations, if I get the spirit board out, people always kind of recoil, and anyone on the front row is all of a sudden 6 rows back. And I just try to explain to them that, unfortunately, it's through things such as the media and Hollywood and films and things like that, they've kind of demonised the spirit board.
Yeah, sure. It's just a tool, isn't it? Again,
it's an instrument for communication. I mean, it's basically a piece of wood with some letters on, and we've cut pieces of, you know, letters out of pieces of paper and made a circle, and it's worked. We've asked for them just to use a glass and give us a yes and no answer with just a glass and it on a table, and it's worked. You know, there's no difference between things like dowsing rods and K2 meters to spirit boards. It's just another instrument, another way for them to communicate with you. It's not a portal to hell or anything like that people tell you it is.
Yeah, I mean, we used to do it a lot when I was teenagers, actually. We had quite an interesting result ourselves once. Okay. We were doing like a Ouija, I'll call it a Ouija board, the glass and letters around the table. And there was one of our friends didn't believe what was going on. And I don't know if I've told this story before, certainly not to you anyway. But he didn't believe what was going on anyway. And we said to him, we said, look, you go and sit over in the corner and write something on a piece of paper. And we'll ask the glass, as you do, if they can tell us what it is you've written. So off he went into the corner, and was sitting there, and he's going with his pen like that, writing. And we said, right, okay, you finished? And we said, right, okay, glass, what has he actually written? Our friend over in the corner, I think his name was Vince. I think that's what his name was. And he actually spelt out G-U-N, gun. Well, we were saying, okay, well, it's spelt out gun here, and he went white. He went as white as a sheet. He hadn't actually, and he held the piece of paper up. He hadn't written gun. He'd drawn a picture of one.
Wow.
You know, and that was absolutely mind blowing. That was, and it blew his mind. It blew all of our, I think we packed up and went home. But
wow, that's really good.
So that was really mind blowing. You know,
yeah.
But he went as white as a sheet. Yeah, because there was no way that any of us would have known what he'd done, you know. And
no.
It was crazy. I mean, I don't think it happened quite as quickly as I've just described. I mean, we went through but it wasn't sort of immediate. But
I think with with spirit boards, I mean, we had something similar to that. We've had it happen several times, but the story I always tell was at Smethwick swimming bath, so it's right close to where I live. And, you know, again, if anyone thinks a place is haunted because it looks old and it looks creepy, it's probably not. I mean, some of the best places we've found to be, you know, really active are, you know, modern, active buildings. So when we turned up here, there were still children leaving with their parents, you know, they'd just been swimming and stuff. So it felt quite weird to be turning up to be doing a ghost hunt while children were, you know, walking out with their armbands on and stuff like that. And,
well, often so it's because of what's been built, you know, it's been built on a piece of land that things may have happened way back in the past.
Absolutely right. Yeah. So people say, oh, it's a new build, it can't be haunted. Well, it can, because there's a residual energy that's existing in that area. And, you know, you can build whatever you want on top of it. It will still exist. So yeah, we were there and we were doing this spirit board, and there was myself and another crew member and a guest, you know, because sometimes we have guests, and this guest, we didn't know who he was, he just turned up, and we were doing the board, and he said, oh, I think this is my dad. So the sceptical side of me said, right, well, if you take your finger off the glass, me and Les, who was the other crew member, will carry on doing the board, but you keep asking the questions. So he took his finger off the glass and he started asking questions such as, what street did we grow up on? What's Mom's name? What's the name of my eldest son? All these questions. And he asked about 8 or 9, and we got every single one right. And I can't, you know, he left in tears. We had to kind of follow him and give him a cup of tea and, you know, kind of calm him down a bit. But I can't explain that, because if he was touching the glass, you could argue that it was the ideomotor effect, where he's, you know, moving the glass around the board subconsciously without meaning to. And that's possible. However, if there's 5 or 6 of you doing the glass, which, as you know, that happens sometimes, you get quite a lot of people involved. What you'd have to have was a subconscious agreement that you're wanting to take the glass where you want to take it. So if we asked for a name and I wanted to take it to H, you wanted to take it to J, somebody wanted to take it to D, you'd have this internal struggle and you'd just see the glass wobbling in the middle and not really going anywhere. But you don't get that. You get the glass fluidly, smoothly move over letter to letter to letter.
Well, quite often it will spin around in the middle, won't it, for quite a bit, and perhaps even go right way around,
And then, that's it, and then find where it wants to go, almost like it's looking for where it needs to go. So it can't be, in my opinion, there's too much there for it to be the ideometer effect. So if that's the case, and this guy wasn't even touching the glass, if it's not a spirit, we're now talking about some kind of telekinesis, where he's putting the answers into our heads and then we're subconsciously moving the glass. If that's the case, you know, this is something just as interesting as it being a spirit. You know, so it might not be spirit related, but it's just as interesting that the fact that this guy could, you know, subconsciously implant thoughts into my head and make me do what he wants me to do. So it's when you get stuff like that I can't explain, and, you know, to this day, I whenever we do a spirit board, I try and think of other ways we can get something like this happening. It just blows my mind, and I can't find any kind of answer to it. I mean, if any of your listeners can come to me with a kind of a suggestion as to how that could have happened, please do.
Yeah, I'll certainly put a link to you on my page anyway. That's the Paranormal Dimensions page on Facebook, if anyone's... I'll make that a bit later. But what about we do seem to do a lot of these investigations in the dark, don't we? Now, whether that's a necessity or whether it's just something that we do it because it's I don't know, more weird or something, makes it look more weird. But I find that when we do it in the dark, it's because then you need a candle. Now I found that, I don't know if you've had a similar experience, the flame of the candle, you can actually ask it to go higher or lower. And I've seen
we've done that.
I've seen that happen quite a lot.
Yeah, we've done that quite a lot, and it normally answers us, you know, we've asked for it to just be blown out, and it has been, which is quite interesting. I mean, to go back to why we do it in the dark, the most easiest answer is because most of us work in the day. So, you know, it's when we do investigations, it's because it's on a night and we're not working anymore. So there's that aspect of it. But also it's because in my mind, in my opinion, it's because our other senses are heightened in the dark.
Yeah.
So if you're sat at your desk at work and you know, just on the computer, and you feel like something's just come and stood next to you, you felt a little brush on your arm. If you look at it in broad daylight and you see that nothing's there, you convince yourself there's nothing there. You say, oh, there's nothing there. It must have just been a draft, or I'm making it up. Nothing really happened. So you dismiss it, you forget about it. Now, if you're in the dark and you feel like something's come and stood next to you, brushed you or touched you, you then begin to rely on your other senses a little bit more. So your touch, your hearing, all these other senses that you have, and you start to use those, and you start to kind of build a picture of what it could be that's next to you. So it means that although there are negatives to that, so it could be that you're using your other senses, and therefore you begin to exaggerate what you felt, and so that's the one side of the coin. And as we say, you have to look at it from a skeptical point of view. However, the reason that we do it like that is so you do use your other senses. Your other senses are heightened. It's not that ghosts only come out in the dark. It's just that we rely on our sight too much, and what we see is what we believe. And if we can eliminate that and start to trust our other instincts, we might find things that we wouldn't have found before.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it does actually make you concentrate your mind, doesn't it, on what you do?
That's it.
Rather than
exactly.
you're getting distractions from maybe around. That's probably part of it as well.
That's it.
But, it's all very interesting. But that candle thing, it's really pretty amazing.
It is. When you see it happen, it's quite mind blowing.
Yeah. Are you actually? Do you consider yourself psychic at all, Kieran?
No,
I don't either. I don't consider myself psychic as well. But I think we all do get these. You can actually sense changes of atmosphere, and you can actually sense.
I think I class myself as I think the word's empathetic. So I pick up on feelings and emotions.
Yeah, I think we all do that to an extent, don't we?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's to do with the residual energy that's around us, and things that have happened in certain places.
Well, you can walk into a room. You can walk into a room and think, "Oh, there's an atmosphere in here."
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, an interesting story about that was we did a place in Wolverhampton called Graiseley Old Hall. And there was a room, it had 3 single beds in and a vanity table with a stool. So we were in this room, there was about 7, 8 of us, and I was sat on the stool and some people were sat on the beds, and there was this guy just walking up and down and he wouldn't sit down. And I said, look mate, just sit down, relax. And he said, no, I can't sit down. I said, just sit on the bed. He said, look, I cannot sit on those beds. I said, I'll tell you what then, you sit on this stool and I'll sit on the bed. And he agreed. So we swapped over and I sat on the bed. Within seconds of sitting on the bed, I was crying my eyes out. I felt completely helpless, completely hopeless. I remember saying to the person next to me, if you had a gun now and gave me the gun, I'd end it all.
Wow.
Because there's just no point in living. Whilst this was happening, there was a lady sat near the door, and it was one of those old wooden latched doors. And the door unlatched and opened, and someone said, was that you? And she said, yeah, I needed to open the door. The door can't be locked. So we were picking up on all these emotions, and we did some research later, and we found out that there were children sexually abused in the room. And, it would have happened on the bed. So as soon as I sat on the bed, I picked up on this emotion. The lady by the door opened the door because, she felt like she couldn't have it locked because the children wouldn't have wanted it locked. And it was really interesting, and it's always quite satisfying, I guess, when you do a bit of research and you can link an experience to evidence and to factual based happenings, and if you can link them together and come up with the right answer, then that's always satisfying. But I don't class myself as psychic. I've had I see shadows and stuff like that, but no, I'm not like Derek Acora or anything like that.
Yeah, it's all about Derek Acora. Now, I actually think he's actually quite psychic, from what I've heard.
So do I.
But I think he was led astray a little bit because of making TV. Yeah, when he was on Most Haunted, I think he was because they had to produce results. He was under pressure to produce results basically, and he I think he just got caught up in the whole thing, didn't he? And,
I think he was treated really badly by Most Haunted. There's so much stuff again on YouTube and stuff, where you can hear them having a go at him off camera and kind of slagging him off behind his back and stuff like that. And I think you're right, what we spoke about earlier, where they have to get results, they have to keep the entertainment side of it flowing. And I think he felt that pressure. I think he was probably made to say and do things that weren't right in order for the benefit of the show.
Yeah, led him to a trap, basically, wasn't it?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And I think it was a shame, but I genuinely do like Derek Acora. I mean, that's quite controversial nowadays because it's easy to follow the bandwagon and have a go at Derek Okora, but I think he's actually quite genuine.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I've never met him. I don't know if you have.
No.
I'd like to though. I think he comes across as a nice chap.
Yeah, he comes across as genuine and a caring guy. But I've got friends that are mediums that have that ability, and they're just as good. And so there's definitely something in it. I always say that basically these guys, they have the ability to tune into Radio X and Radio Y at the same time, like we spoke of earlier. I occasionally get a glimpse of Radio X while I'm listening to Y, but these guys have basically got a digital radio station, and they can listen to anything they want. They've got DAB.
Yeah, you don't get it so much nowadays. That was very interesting, Kieran. Tell us what your book was again, just before we pack up.
Yeah, sure. The book's titled An Introduction to Paranormal Investigation. So you can get it on Amazon in ebook and paperback. You can get it on any ebook site, so Barnes and Noble or anything like that. And you can contact me, so feel free to contact me at kieran.woodhouse@gmail.com if you'd like me to post you one. Some people like it signed or whatever.
Yeah, I might take you up on that actually.
Yeah, you just got to let me know where to post it. I mean, I've sent some to Finland, to Germany, to America, so it's doing quite well.
That's good. I'll certainly put a link on the page anyway.
Yeah.
That's good. No, it's been very interesting, Kieran. It's been lovely talking to you again. I think we'll have to wind it up there, otherwise we're going into the next show again. But, I'll keep on doing that recently. But,
it's sometimes good to keep talking for hours.
I know, yeah. It's been really interesting. But, especially after last week when you had me on yours. But at least you've done most of the talking this time. I know I've interrupted you a couple of times, but there you go. That's how it goes, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, Kieran, for coming on, and hopefully speak to you again, and maybe see you at Awakening next year, eh?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, David.
Or if not before.
It's been a pleasure.
But anyway, you know where I am. Stay in touch and everything. And thank you, Kieran Woodhouse. And I hope you've enjoyed it, everybody. And you've been listening to Paranormal UK Radio Network and Paranormal Dimensions. I'm David Young. And goodbye, Kieran Woodhouse. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Bye.
Cheers all. Thank you. Bye-bye. Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.